Hey there, strategic authorpreneurs. I'm Crystal Hunt.
And I'm Michela Mitrani. We are here to help you save time, money, and energy as you level up your writing career.
Welcome to episode 37 of the Strategic Authorpreneur podcast. On today's show, we're talking about how to get the most out of virtual writers' conferences. But first, we're going to dig a little bit into what we have been up to this past week. Michele, what have you been doing?
I am so excited to say that I've been working a lot to what is going to be the first publication in Italian in 3 years and a half. And the first publication in English in around 1 year and a half. And it's a mythological fantasy novella that I've been working on. And there are so many things to do, Crystal, and so many pieces that you have to keep track on the promotion, production, publication side. And it's amazing, but at the same time, sometimes it feels like overwhelming. So I'm just trying to, there is actually a very good suggestion Krista gave me. I use one tool called Asana, which I did not know, and it's saving me a lot of time. So that's one tool that we can definitely get you a link on the resources pages. It's helping me a lot on this like pre-publication kind of phase, the organization kind of thing. And because we discussed it so many times about the importance of being able to organize everything so that this is going to be like a very long career, hopefully. And one of the other things that, Krista, you were saying is this is not going to be your only book. So you want to be able to replicate this system, book 2, 3, 27, 120. I'm not sure if I'm being a bit too optimistic, but I hope there are going to be that many books. So organization is super important. We mentioned so many times, and I'm seeing now it's true. It's very true, especially if you have to basically publish 2 books in the span of 2 weeks. So I am overwhelmed with joy. Also because I got just a few days ago from my designer the cover for Soul of Stone, which is the mythological fantasy I'm gonna publish. And then like 30 seconds after, I was like via WhatsApp, Crystal, I've got the cover. And she was like one of the very first person to see it with my wife. And I was like, what do you think? And because they gave us 3 different options, and we were like, what do you think is the best? And I was like, this one, that one. It's exciting. It's when you see that your book, it's actually taking shape, and you can see it from my face. I'm really, really super extra pumped. But at the same time, it can be overwhelming. So this is why organization is so important. So that's what I've been up to. I've been trying to survive to the publication of these 2 novellas. But I also want to suggest you, as I do usually, book of the day. And this time is by an author we mentioned more than once. And I believe we already mentioned this book, but I just wanted to underline the importance of it. If you're not on YouTube, you're not going to see it, but it's called Amazon Decoded by David Gogran. And it's basically a marketing guide to the Kindle store. And the reason why I'm suggesting this book is there are so many ways things can go wrong on Amazon, on the Kindle store, and so many things that authors can do to optimize their release, and they don't know. So there are so many things that these books basically say, good practices, how to use metadata, how actually Amazon algorithm works, and how both wide authors are case, but also people that are basically chasing the page trend. It's explaining. This book, it's everything there. And I just can't recommend it enough. And it's not a short book. It's like a book that has a lot of resources in. And this is the 2nd edition. So it's also up to date. I think David released it a couple of months ago, not very long ago. So definitely, I suggest you to read this book. It's super helpful. This is the biggest online store on the planet. Your book is going to be there if you want to make any money. And so I suggest you definitely to check that out. And I want to know, Krista, what have you been up to in this past week?
Well, a few things. I've been reading this book, which it's digital, but I'm holding up the cover here, and it is called Alchemy, The Dark Art and Curious Science of Creating Magic in Brands, Business, and Life by Rory Sutherland. And it's a really interesting, effectively a book about marketing, but it's really about human behavior and how a lot of it is actually quite illogical. And then when we look at some of the evolutionary causes of those things, it makes a little more sense. And he talks a lot about how you bring those pieces together to create what sometimes seems like magic, but is actually not necessarily magic. It's really just using what we know about how people's brains work. So he talks about psychologic, which is really psychology, which is an interesting way. As he points out in the book, it's very rare actually for marketing to really focus in on psychology in a deep way and to really understand people. It's often coming from an economic perspective that we tackle marketing and promotion, and it isn't really about the economics of it. It's more about getting people to act in the way you want them to act, or to buy into something or feel a sense of urgency. All of those things happen in ways we don't really expect. So as I'm getting ready to sort of relaunch my Rivers End book club and revamp, refresh, re-release all of my books wide, I'm just looking at how do I want to create some of that magic in my publishing world, and how will I go about that? So that's been really interesting to kind of ponder. And also on the writing side right now, I'm just putting the finishing touches on the full-time author book that I'm writing with Eileen Cook. So we have been getting ready for a December launch, and following on attending the Surrey International Writers Conference and presenting and watching as many of the recorded sessions as I can, just processing all that information and making sure that there's nothing we really wanted to change or add to what we had in our book, so that we have as complete a picture as possible. Two other exciting developments. It is fiscal year end as of the 31st of October in my world. So it is the time of year when I review all of last year's expenses and income and really do the data based taking stock of where the business is at, and then putting the finishing touches on my business plan for next year based on what I see in the data. So that has been really interesting. And my daughter officially started as my author assistant today. So I now have a minion, as it were, to help me. And she is diving into doing basically a series Bible in Plotter. So she's going to go through all of my books and enter all the characters, the places, the events that happen, to make sure that in my own planning documents, I have everything in there from everything I've planned. And I have a hard time keeping track of which parts I've been publicly committed to and which haven't. So the database she's in charge of is all the stuff that's made it into publication and can't be changed. And then my planning database is all the stuff I've envisioned but hasn't necessarily been in print yet. Okay. So in participating in these online conferences and, doing some teaching and talking to a lot of the people who have been attending, I've now been to, I think I've been to 5 or 6 online conferences in the last few months for writers, and have just downloaded the file package for another one that all kind of happens virtually at your own timeline. So I've been really interested in seeing kind of how that virtual writers conference experience compares with the real thing, in air quotes, or the in-person, in real life versions. So today, that's what we're digging into is, how are the virtual conferences different from the regular ones, and how do you get the most out of that other format? So we are going to dive right in, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that if there is something good that happened from everything this year is that we discovered different ways to connect. and using the internet in a completely, well, not a completely, but on a different scale. Something like Zoom, for example, or like a software that allows us to meet and connect with so many other people online. I don't think we're really a thing like 2 or 3 years ago. Now, because of the need of being able to connect and keep really the economy running, and then stuff like Zoom, for example, really started being used on a massive scale. And I think like what we're going to talk about today is like opportunities. And I do believe uh, I do believe that conference that are online do have a lot of pros that in-person conference don't have. And I think it's important that we explore them. Crystal said she has been participating at a number of different conferences online in the last few months. I can say I participated really only on one conference, the Sir International Writing Conference, but that conference is so huge that I felt like I was in 12 different conferences at the same time. And I really do mean it. I was lucky enough to be one of the volunteers, so I could see also some behind the scene that were very cool. And I got to interact with some of the presenters. I introduced a couple of them. But really, what I would like to say to just set up the tone for this podcast episode is that I don't believe that online conferences are necessarily the poor child of a conference that are online. There are definitely some pros that you cannot get from the in-person event. And again, we're going to dive into those in a few moments. But really, the thing is, if it's important for us to connect as writers, it's important for us to have a tool, a software, an app, whatever it is, that allows us to do just that. And I think virtual conference for writers, authors, but even if you have any other professions, are useful, are instruments that you should be using. And we saw, like with Zoom, you can do so many different things. From have closed caption to show your screen, to record, to have pools, to get questions. Those are all things that you really can't have on an in-person conference. Again, we're going to talk about that a bit more in detail. But before that, I wanted to ask you, Crystal, you said you participated to a number of conferences, right? And I just wanted to ask you, we mentioned that there are some pros. Of course, there are going to be cons. If you had to summarize the experience that you had with these online conferences, what would you say is the most important thing that you took out? That's the difference, the number one difference in good and in between bracket bad compared with an in-person event to maybe people that have never been on a conference online yet.
That is a good set of questions. So I found as an attendee, there are a large number of pros. The first of which is being able to do sessions like in your pajamas from the comfort of your own home. I find it's often a little bit uncomfortable if you're there in person and you're sitting all day and you can't really move around or anything because it's a bit disruptive for the presenters. So it was really nice to be able to just walk around my house and listen to sessions on my phone and, be able to be a bit more flexible about how that works. So I've done a lot of different sessions actually while cleaning my house or sitting outside on the deck or, sipping my cup of tea. It really is easier, I find, to stay a bit more balanced. And for me, at least, it's easier to hit log off and not feel quite so much like you're missing out. Whereas at the real conference, the tendency to just like stay in the public spaces all the time because you don't want to miss out any chance to socialize with people. There still is some of that FOMO stuff going on, but not quite as much, I found. So that was definitely an issue. One of the upsides is accessibility. So like at the conference last week, we were able to have closed captions running, and transcripts of the sessions were shareable. Things were recorded. So I don't know about all of you, but I often hit the overwhelm stage not so very far into a big conference where you are absorbing information all day, every day, and your brain just gets kind of fried. And you hit a point where you just can't really take in any more information. A lot of the online conferences are being recorded because the ability to do that is much greater and easier than it would be in real life. In real life, arranging for camera crews and all of that stuff and streaming video for all the sessions that are happening concurrently, it gets very expensive and it's a lot more difficult to organize. Whereas hitting the record button in Zoom or having that set up is much, much easier. So that's something I've really been enjoying about the last couple of sessions, is just being able to watch at my own pace, and also to be able to decide on the order I want to watch them. So I actually went through, I'm just looking around my office to see if it's in here, but I think it's in the other room. I made a little somebody made a bingo sheet of all of the sessions at the Surrey conference. And so I downloaded it, printed it out, and then I used my highlighters to color code all of the different areas. So all the sessions on plot are one color, and all the sessions on character are another color. All the stuff about the business of being an author is the third color. So I really kind of customized the packages of information, and now I'm watching all the stuff inside of one package of information and making notes on it together. And so you can kind of custom craft your conference experience, which is very cool. The other upside is that some folks, you know, are in sessions. Well, I always miss out on so much while I'm teaching because I'd love to go see the sessions that my colleagues are doing, but you don't get a chance when you're the one who's doing the talking. And so the fact that a lot of the master classes and other sessions were recorded meant that you can also see multiple things happening at the same time slot. So that does really open things up as far as information. And I think another pro of accessibility is the cost is usually much less for an online delivery, because you're not dealing with food costs and hotels and travel and the space rental that has to be factored into the cost to attend some of these events in person. And you really do get a worldwide representation of people, which is very, very cool. So that was all of that. Lots of pros, I think. And the technology really does let you do a lot of this stuff in ways we hadn't really explored before this year. And I think we'll talk about socialization a little bit in a minute. But what did you find? Is there any pros or cons that you experienced that I left out of that list?
Yeah, there are some things that at least I've noticed as I've been the introducer to some of the presenters, and I will always remember I was the introducer for one of the Donald Moss, the New York agent webinar, and at one point he stopped. He was reading the chat, and because it was a webinar where he was asking, "Okay, guys." I'm going to give you this assignment, and then you let me know, like write something about, I don't know, passion or this kind of stuff. And he was reading the chat, and there were a lot of people there writing. And he was stopped, and he was like, guys, one of the things that I'm noticing is that for the very first time, I can actually see what you're writing. On a conference, when I am giving an assignment, there will be like maybe 100 people, and of course, I can't read them all. But in there, with that chart, he had all the screen, and he could read every single one of them. And so he gazed better. He had a better idea on what they were writing or what they were thinking. Also, from that very webinar, there were so many questions that he was able to basically go through. So he didn't even need me in that case, and he could basically have a sense of what really was the thing that they wanted to ask. So these are a couple of things that I've really noticed, and that made me also pause, because it was a way to underline how virtual conference do have a pro, several different pros. But one of the things is, I think, what technology can give us that we cannot get when we are just in person because of logistic problems or time constraints. This is just one of the things that I noticed, the ability of the presenter, in this case Don, to being able to really see what the people in the room were saying to him and asking to him. Of course, there are also things that are not as good. What I can say is that I also participate to one of the international writer conference past year, and they're just how can I explain this? I like to be in between rooms, and I want to move, and I want to see people. I want to see their face, the way they move or they interact between each other. You can connect online, of course, but at the end of the day, it's just a screen. Like, you can't do like that much. So maybe it's because I'm Italian, but I need to be in a room and I need to feel the people or the person that is in front of me, even to understand a bit more of what made them tick, what made them interesting. And it's just something I really couldn't see in 2 dimension. And that's definitely was a con for me, which is just for me. It might be not for the other person. So I couldn't really get an idea of that person. That's why I was maybe a bit more laid back. I was a bit more formal, because I didn't really know what the other person was trying to say. So maybe some, just as you can see, I move a lot, like the hand movement, gesture. That's one of the major cons for me. But there are so many other pros. One of the things that I really loved was that Crystal and I and other volunteers or coordinator or member from the board, we were actually able to get tutorial on how the instrument we were going to use worked. So, for example, we use like Discord for the private chat. We use Zoom. All of those things, we weren't just thrown away, just figure out how to use them. There was an organization before that that was very, very well planned. And I'm sure that this is also because of Katie and Krista and all the wonderful people from the board that organized the conference. But what I'm trying to say is that we were given the tools to enjoy the conference at the best. And that's not something you can probably always 100% have in an in-person conference, because what you get is like a pamphlet or maybe a magazine with the event and all the other stuff. But on a Zoom room, you have a bit more power. For example, let's say you are in a room and you want to speak with person number one that is like 5 or 6 on your right. You can't do that. You can't whisper to him. But in Zoom, you can private chat a person while something is happening. You can have a conversation with him or her. So these are just a couple of things that I really saw giving a potential in the future, if things are gonna stay the same for some time, as it seems. We can really use this new knowledge that we have to make the best out of it. So I would say these are some of the pros, and also some of the cons for online conference. I just mentioned before, Crystal, this socialization, if you will, part of it, and how it take place in a different way in an online contest. And I just wanted to have your opinion on that. How do you think, especially if we're going to use this kind of technology in the next few months until things don't stable out, how is it impacting the way people socialize? So what happened to you, for example? How did you leave this difference in the virtual world?
Yeah, the social side of things is definitely interesting. Some of the conferences I've been to are live, in the sense that you click a link and you show up to a Zoom room and your presenter is sharing content with you. And so sometimes you can see the other people on the screen if it's in a meeting format versus a webinar format. So webinar format, you really only see the presenters. Nobody else is on screen, and you're just chatting in the chat with the other folks who are in the session. Whereas the meeting environment one, you are seeing like the Hollywood Squares kind of option, where you see everybody's faces and you can kind of interact a little bit that way. I think there's a different feel to that when you can see other people in the class, and that has both its good and its bad sides. One is it's super distracting, actually, when you have a whole bunch of people moving around and doing their own thing, and some people have cameras on and some are off, and some have pets walking through the screen or kids calling for stuff or whatever. And so, that is kind of a source of a bit of chaos. But with the option to switch to speaker view, you can just really focus in on the person who's talking. And then there's the option to kind of engage with the other people. So I think you feel like you're part of something in a different way when it's set up in that meeting space kind of approach. I think there's also a lot of other tools that you can bring into the picture. Not all conferences do, because it is a heck of a lot of work. I can say that from experience. To have other channels. So Discord is a very common way of having chat forums, and we called it like the hallways at SIWC, where, between sessions you can chat with other people and you can arrange to go meet up somewhere. We had a virtual bar space that was set up. It was a Zoom room dedicated to being a social space with a whole bunch of different breakout rooms that were for different purposes and had different names and whatever. So you could go in a quiet writing room and just write with friends, or you could hang out and have craft discussions, or you could just visit with people from all over. And so that was a fun way to sort of mimic the structure of what is often the bar or restaurant space in the hotel where people are staying for an in-person conference. We had that virtual equivalent that was open all the time, actually. And so people had the option to just pop in there and be social. And they had the option of posting in Discord or emailing a friend or texting somebody else they knew was at the conference and saying, okay, I'll meet you at the bar at, we had one room called the Cliffs of Insanity from The Princess Bride. We'll meet you at the Cliffs of Insanity at 8:00 tonight, or whatever it was. And so that was a nice way to sort of give people the ability to still have that social time, but it wasn't required as well. So for a lot of people, they really liked that socializing was optional. I mean, if you're at an in-person conference and you're walking through the hallway, people can just come up and talk at you, even if what you really need is peace and quiet. And so the online format had the advantage of letting people choose to opt in or out to those pieces. So for a lot of folks, they are fairly introverted, writery type people, and all of those in real life humans gets to be a bit much at times. And so a lot of people were commenting that they really liked that they had the option to just not participate when they were tired or stressed or had kind of had enough of people for that day. So that, I think, was really great. And I think it was really interesting to see the interactions when joining a group of people requires you just click a button to join a Zoom room conversation. It seemed like people were more willing to jump into a Zoom room than they were to necessarily walk up to a group of people in a bar and interrupt a conversation to kind of join in. So a lot of people also were mentioning that they found that to be really freeing and fun. And because everybody is an equal square on the screen, it was a nice way, as Michele said, if someone is sitting 3 seats over from you in a classroom, you can't necessarily talk directly to them. But in this way, you get to see everybody's faces. Nobody's sitting behind you. So you're able to really engage with people in a different way. And I think the faces and names got to be really familiar for folks. And because we could use our virtual backgrounds, people were being really creative about that and were using that to express their personalities. So at the live Surrey conference and lots of others, there's generally either buttons or ribbons or some sort of something that identifies different genres you write in and special interest groups and all kinds of things. And so the virtual background options let us do that. And it was really neat. So I think some of the more unusual social things that happen is we did pull off karaoke. We had big group sing-alongs. We still had keynotes. We had all of those things that we all associate with the in-person experience. And it really did help to make it as much, I think, like the real thing as we could. There was no hugging, which is really sad, as that's one of the things that, people love about seeing their friends at these live events and getting to meet people that you've maybe only seen online before, or maybe you've been interacting on author forums for years but never actually met. So I think, it isn't a replacement for sure for the in-person, but as far as upsides and opportunities to use that technology, I think they are there, but we do have to be open-minded about how we approach those things. And we also have to be a little bit clever about learning the technology. And I think, as Michele said, it requires a lot of leveling up on everybody's part and creativity to think about how to use these, what were really meant to be business tools, in kind of a creative, social, non-businessy sort of way. So there's been some really cool stuff coming out of various author communities, and people are getting really creative about how they use those things, which has been really wonderful to see. So personally, I've really enjoyed seeing what our humans are capable of when given the opportunity to stretch. So that's very cool.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of things I will put in the positive traits, in the pros. We mentioned recording, right? To have the liberty, the freedom to go and see the recording of a webinar or a masterclass or whatever you have it at your own pace. And I was actually doing that just a few hours before recording this podcast. There was I think it was a Q&A that Brandon Sanderson, the fantasy and science fiction author, was adding about traditional publishing and independent publish. And actually, I was part of that Q&A live, but there were so many things that I lost and that Brandon was saying they were like gold. And so I went back and I actually watched that recording twice. Why is this important? For two reasons. You can really sit when you have a moment in time that your brain, as Krista was saying, is not frying, and enjoy the conference a bit better. And that's exactly what I did. With Brandon Sanderson, this Q&A, I listened to it between two introductions that I was saying while I was eating, because I didn't have time. But the second time, I was like with the spreadsheet, the notebook, and I was taking the notes out of it. Like I really spent a lot of time to just dive in it. And it was so interesting that I even made a live on my YouTube channel 3 hours ago about how important and interesting that conversation was. So it is something that you can definitely use as an asset afterward. And the second reason is that it really gives you the opportunity of re-listening to something and internalize it. Once you listen to a conference that is live, it's done. If nobody else, it's like setting up cameras and all the device and stuff like that. But if you have the recording, that conference can be there for a very long time. So I would say this is one of the major pros. Like the knowledge of that moment is frozen in time. And that's, for me, huge. It's amazing. And it's something that we cannot underestimate the importance of. So this is something that I just wanted to underline. And the second thing that Krista was mentioning, actually, about the gallery view, I have an episode that is very interesting. One of the keynotes was Eileen Cook, one of our common friend, and she was giving basically the last speech that closes officially the conference, right? And if you ever listen to Eileen Cook, one of her public speech, it's almost impossible for you to not start crying, but in a very good way, because she has the gift of, I don't know exactly how to say it, but just to elicit a lot of emotions. And for the very first time, I was able to see hundreds of people while she was talking, their reaction, and most of them were basically crying of joy because her words they were so strong. And the one that weren't, they were aliens. So this is important, and this is something that I was not able to see the first time Eileen was able to address the study conference also 1 year ago. I could just see her from the distance, so like 20 meters, because the room was very big, of course. This time I could see her like she was in front of me, and I could see every single person tearing down and crying and enjoying a conversation, even if they were holding cat and dogs. But I felt, I don't know how to explain it. I felt it more like connected to them, and that's one of the only probably time that I felt that was better than the real thing, because I could really see the emotion in front of my eyes. So I just wanted to put that in the tool, in the box of the pros, being able to see the reaction of people to Eileen's speech, but also of other speakers. I'm saying Eileen because I saw that one. But this is something important. You can see emotions coming from a speech, anything that can be in a conference, even if it's online. So do not discard this as a B option. This is really an option that is just different from the real thing. That's just what I think, Crystal, about all these things. Again, for me, the recording was one of the most important things. And do not underestimate online conferences. If you have the occasion to assist and to be part of one, be really part of one and see what happens.
I think if you are going to dive into it, we've got a handful of tips for you that might help make it a little more survivable, because it can be easier to access all the things. It makes it pretty tempting to try to do all the things, which can be fairly overloading. So a few survival tips for you. One, make sure that you get up and move around a bit. When there are sessions running from morning till evening, and you could really just sit right here in your chair in front of your computer for the entire day. But especially if it's a multi-day event, you're going to end up feeling not great, to be honest, and pretty exhausted. Screen fatigue is a real thing. So make sure that you're getting up at least, between every session, if not wandering around during the session, if you can, if you're just listening, and making sure that you are also getting a bit of fresh air, whether that is leaving your office window open or stepping outside. If you can, just outside your front door, even for 5 minutes between sessions, will help a lot. Looking off into the distance is really important to recalibrate your vision. So a lot of us have our giant monitors and our computers jammed right up against a wall, especially right now. Everybody's got extra workstations in their homes and everything's all a little bit crazy. So, anytime you can gaze off into the distance for even 20 or 30 seconds, it will help recalibrate your vision. And I noticed since I've been doing that, my glasses have not been getting as stronger as quickly. So every time I go back to the eye doctor, my eyes are usually worse over the last few years since I've been sort of full-time computering. And but I've noticed since I started making a real effort to actually look off into the distance, it is helping to slow that down and occasionally even reverse it a bit. So that is something to keep in mind. I think knowing how you plan to track all your information is also really important. Again, information is easy to grab when it is all digital. And so you're going to be tempted to download every handout that's offered, and you have all the videos and all of the pieces, and that can be a bit much also. So knowing what is your system for organizing your notes from an event? How are you going to keep track of all that, whether it's a single notebook that you put everything into, or if you're digitally oriented. I love actually creating a Scrivener doc or a Google Doc for an event. And if you're there with friends, you can actually divide and conquer. You can go to different sessions and you can each type notes into a shared Google Doc. And that lets you process the information from all the sessions and also get two different perspectives on a session as well. Because if Michaela and I watch the same session, we're going to get different information out of it. So sharing that Google Doc lets us collaborate, and it also makes it a little bit of a fun social thing. So That is something to keep in mind is how are you going to do that? If you are thinking of using Scrivener to organize your notes, the way that that works generally is you can create a folder for an event. I have one master Scrivener document that's for all of my conference notes from everywhere. And I will make a higher level folder for an event, and then I will use scenes for each workshop. And I will put the workshop title and the person's name who's teaching it, and then pile all my notes in there. And then after the event, I can also have another series of folders that are on topic. So I might have one on character and one on plotting and one on the business of being a writer, and I can pull that information and just copy it into those topical folders as well. So then whether I'm looking for something based on, who I remember teaching a class or how long ago it was, or if I'm looking for something by topic, it's really easy to pull that information up and make use of it. Now, I do also really love writing in my notebook, and I'm trying to be offline a little bit more. So if I'm listening to a session, I might make notes in my notebook and then kind of consolidate them all later with the highlights from all the different things kind of combined into a document. Totally up to you how you approach it, but having a plan of how you're going to approach it will help, because you won't end up at the end of the conference with, hundreds of separate pieces of paper or different files that you were taking notes into, and then discover you don't really know how to find anything at the end of all that. Also, eating well and hydrating is super important. For lots of us, we've been holed up in our writing caves on our own for a really long time. And I found I was so parched after talking to people all day, every day during the conference, that the lip balm and the water became very, very, very important. And, if you're going into a big event, maybe prep some soup or some salads, or make sure you stock enough groceries on hand that you have enough quick and reasonably healthy things to access, that you can go into conference mode fully and really experience it, and not be tempted to just live off of chips, which is always tempting. I think one last thing too is to think about how can you sort of reinvent the conference experience for yourself. And I know a lot of people have a hard time with distractions at home, and they really wanted that kind of clear brain time to go and go right into the conference content and really just fully immerse themselves in being a writer. And so a lot of people actually went and stayed at hotels by themselves and just did all of the sessions from those hotels wherever they were staying, so that they weren't dealing with the kind of day-to-day of their normal lives, and they had that sort of retreat experience, which is another option for you potentially if you live somewhere where that is possible right now. All right, so now that you are ready to take on some of those online conferences, there are loads out there. Have fun exploring. And we would love to hear back about any suggestions you have for us as well. So feel free to send us ideas at strategicauthorpreneur.com. If you have anything you'd like us to share with our listeners, that would be great. And now it is time for the Curious Jar to make an appearance. As usual, I will stick my hand in the jar filled with colored papers until Michele says stop.
Stop now.
Oh, green one. Okay. All right. Today's question is, how do you visualize characters and keep all the details straight?
That is an interesting question. But what question from the Curious Jar is not? All of them are interesting. So I'll try to go first, if that's fine with you, Crystal. How do I visualize characters? So it depends from book to book. Usually what happens to me is that I will visualize a scene. And then this scene is populated by characters, which I know completely nothing about. And this is something that happened with one of the novella I'm working on. there was a scene that I was interested in, I had to populate it with characters, and so I started visualizing them. By visualizing them, I just mean that I'm seeing that with the eyes of my mind, if you will. I don't dream them. I don't imagine them. I just try to be very pragmatic, even in something that use very the imagination. I'm trying to start from a ground or a place and then build up particulars. So, and that's something that I've noticed. The second way I visualize characters in the research stage. So I will research on something that I want to write about. And if there is something of a story that really interests me, and then I will start imagining the famous what if question and start to populate that with an answer to the question. So there are different ways that I can visualize characters, and none of them is always 100% the same. At least that's what I've noticed happening. One thing, for example, that happened once, I was listening a masterclass from Margaret Atwood, and I'm going to say this again, even though I already related the episode, but she started the trailer of this masterclass with this sentence, Little Red Riding Hood. Let's start the story from a different place. It was dark inside the wolf. And when I listened to that sentence, I basically came up with the character of Tavana, which is Little Red Riding Hood Grandma, which found herself in the wolf's stomach. So I visualized that character almost immediately. So it depends really on what I'm doing, what I'm writing, what I'm reading, what I'm visualizing. It can be really many different things. And that's basically how I visualize character. And now it's Crystal's turn to unveil the way she visualized her character, which I'm sure is going to be very different from mine.
Well, I have a lot of characters to keep track of because I've populated an entire town with people. So I need some systems to do that because I think at last count I had over 250 characters that I was keeping track of. And they all kind of cross paths in different stories. And I need to know what age they are and what other characters they went to school with and who they know and who they're related to. So in terms of visualization, I'm not very good at like physical details of people in terms of picturing them in my mind. I'm better at sort of feeling the characters of like what's on the insides of them. And so I use stock photos actually, where I will go through photos until I find somebody that feels right. And then I will actually use that photo to help me as I'm bringing them to life. So when I'm visualizing a character, I actually start with who they are, so their emotional wounds and their histories and, you know, whatever kind of central things matter to that character. I'm a psychologist. It makes sense. I start from the insides and work my way out. And then I try to sort of match that up with pictures so that I don't send everybody off in multiple directions in order to get consistency for hair color or things like that. I need to be able to see that to remind me of who and what they are in terms of what I have described them as on the page. So I do have Plotter, which is a great tool if you are looking at building a series Bible and wanting to know how to do that. But for years before that, I used just spreadsheets. I have a master spreadsheet and I have everybody's name and there's all these different columns for what their job is and who their family members are and what stories they appear in and all that kind of stuff. So for me, sometimes the picture comes first. Sometimes, like if I'm exploring through a stock photo database, every now and then I will find a picture that just grabs me. And I just will save that to my desktop or into a folder until my brain connects it with the insides of one of the characters that I've been developing for something else. So yeah, it's a fairly organic process, I think. But I do not have a great visual memory in that sense, the same way I'm really not good with floor plans of houses, and I actually find floor plans for the houses that my characters live in because otherwise I get all turned around and confused. So visual aids are very helpful as far as keeping track of all that.
I would say at this point, if you'd like to see our show notes or links to resources that we mentioned, and for coupons and discount on the tools we love and we use, you can visit us at strategicauthorpreneur.com. Also, remember, we recently added a Buy Us a Coffee button in the homepage of our website, strategicauthorpreneur.com. So if you feel like buy us a coffee, although we don't drink coffee, but you get it. We are using this on books and we're blowing up on other stuff like that, like champagne or Prosecco's when release one of our books. And then you can definitely click that button and see what happens.
I love that when you're the one who does that side of the announcements, we're crazy and wild and spending it on champagne. And when it's me, I'm like, yeah, we're going to pay for website hosting and podcast distribution. Clearly, Michaela is way more fun. But yes, any contributions you want to make to help us with operating costs is amazing. So thank you for that. And also, we do send out a weekly newsletter. So every Monday, we send out just one thing to help you level up your writing and publishing career in some fashion. So if you haven't already signed up, you should visit our website and click the magic button so that you get those messages every week. And lastly, we would love if you hit the subscribe button wherever you are listening to this podcast, because next week we're going to be talking with Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi, who are the co-authors of many of the thesaurus guides for writers that we love and are constantly recommending to you. And we have them on the show to talk about co-authoring and how you work collaboratively with other authors. So they have managed to do this successfully for a very long time, and I have all of the interest in picking their brains about this. So I cannot wait to hear what you all think about that interview. And until next time, keep writing, and we'll see you soon.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Like, for some reason, my dark mode has kind of gone a little nutsy. I cannot see things properly.
Maybe it's a universe way of trying to say something. You have to move on the light side, Krista, not the dark side. That's what.
Yeah, but then it's like this.
Oh yeah, you are shining.
Yeah, I glow in the dark, basically, which is not at all what we want. So.
She's a Sith.
Works,
she's not a Jedi. She's a Jedi. No, she's a Sith.
Yep. Oops.
What happened? Oh.
It disappeared, my whole document. That wasn't what I intended to do.
Crystal. It's fine. We still love you.
Okay.
Let's definitely go at the end of the video.
My little squeaky.
Squeaky.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's gonna end up in the end for sure.
Yep. So that's exciting. Okay.
Thank you so much for giving me material to work on, Crystal.
You said you didn't have enough, so you know.
You're doing an
I'm
amazing
just trying
job.
to make your life easier.
Thank you so much.